how do we deal with this conundrum of giving someone a substrate, whether it be inert or something that clearly has a lot of powerful value, whether it's a botanical, whether it's a herb, whether it's a supplement, from the very powerful placebo effect?
I would turn that question right on its head. I sat on a beach once in Greece reading a paper about the placebo effect, particularly in pain, and the calculation that in some situations placebo can account for 80% of the observed phenomena. And so first of all, my confidence went down the tubes. I said, well, we're teaching people 4 or 5 years to do something with placebo can do even better.
Yeah.
And then I realized I'd turned it the wrong way around, because placebo is simply the self-healing, correcting phenomenon. And it doesn't take much nudging. And then I realized that's what we were doing. We're nudging self-correction. And I sat on that beach and said, you know what, I want to get better placebos, to find ways of breaking a slight blockage that, a blank placebo, let's say, might not break through. So I very much see the herbs at their most powerful, which is why it can be so quick, as I call it nudging. It just knocks the door a bit and just gets something moving, and then the rest is placebo. And everything we do is placebo if you turn it that way around. So a pharmaceutical that has a receptor effect can overcome placebo in a head-to-head competition. But, as honest doctors will admit, the pharmaceutical doesn't heal. It'll break down a door somewhere, but the healing is what happens afterwards. And that's the business that I think I want to be in. I want to be in how to help the body to find its own innate healing capacity.
Yeah. In the hierarchy of all the different interventions that one has available to them, so you have diet, you have mind therapies, you have exercise, you have a whole suite of different elements, and then you have pharmaceutical supplements, herbs. Where do you see it fitting? And like you said, nudging the door open and stuff. Is it purely a nudge, or can it actually have those those genuine therapeutic values?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of evidence to show that plants do cover the gamut, the whole spectrum, from foods on the one hand, which is where we start, and we'll come back to today. We're going to talk with great enthusiasm about how we can add value to our foods simply and cheaply, right through to things like digitalis, which is foxglove, for heaven's sake. And so some of the strongest remedies are plant-based, or originally come from plants. Opium, forget, say no more. So there is a spectrum. And, particularly when we talk about self-care and looking after ourselves, of course, we always focus on the gentler versions. But as you get increasingly practice proficient, you can use some of the stronger ones to break a stronger door, if you like.
Yeah. Well, let's look at some of the different cultures that have introduced herbal medicine. So, I'm from an Indian background, so Ayurveda is sort of
the oldest of the lot, probably.
Yeah. It's definitely been a guiding thread throughout my whole life. The use of turmeric and ginger and all the rest of it. But there are a number of other cultures that use different things. Whereabouts were you traveling when you went away?
North Africa, and so that's Islamic.
Okay.
And then Central America, which is a combination of indigenous American and Spanish traditions.
Okay.
And so you had this, and it's often a blend. We put together an ethno map once of the world, and there's a couple of 3 main centers of independently springing up cultures. Ayurveda is the oldest, India, China close behind, and then what we call Galenic, the European tradition, and they blend in the middle with the Urdu, in the Pakistani world, which is essentially Galenic, and Islamic is Galenic. But then you see the overlaps, and particularly when you talk about North America, you get the translation over the Atlantic and from Asia the other way. So it's a blend and some meld, and what I practice is sort of global. I practice some I use Chinese remedies and Indian remedies and North American remedies, a lot of North American remedies.
Yeah, yeah. And are there, like a spice palette, are there particular standout members of all those different families and cultural traditions that are most prominent?
Yeah, I was brought up a lot on the North American traditions. That was a historical, the post-industrial British, very interesting story. You know, Britain did industrial revolution more than anybody else, and within a generation, the countryside had emptied, and we were moving into Halifax and Bradford and Leeds and Manchester and so on in large numbers. And these were country people, and they were more normally looking after themselves, mostly by women in the villages. They moved into back-to-back housing in the working class areas, proletariat, and they changed gender, the herbalists, and they were blokes who set up shops, the herbalist shops. One of the first was a man called Jesse Boot in Nottingham, who was the co-founder of the National Association of Medical Herbalists. Well, Boot might have another connotation to you, because he was originally a herbalist shop. And that was the way it went. It became a functional medicine for the working people, but they didn't have a legacy to fall back on. They just had polyglot, village traditions. Along came an American who had rediscovered the principles of Greek medicine in the Midwest. And it was all about hot and cold and using cayenne, which is a Native American remedy. Yeah. And so he came back with this new idea, Thompsonian medicine. No one's ever heard of it now, but it was the basis of a new tradition of herbal medicine as a profession in the UK. And I inherited that tradition when I studied in Leicester in the 1970s. And so half of my materia medica was North American. Echinacea, the native ginseng, golden seal, and a lot of very exciting gynecological remedies come from North America.
Well, let's talk about how we actually utilize some of these, because we have access to all those different elements that you just mentioned. Cayenne, echinacea is very popular, obviously. Ashwagandha, something that you asked me if I took before here, because we're towards the end of the day, but I've still got a lot of energy. Don't worry. How does one approach this huge encyclopedia of herbal remedies when there's so much misinformation, there's so much varying quality? It's very hard to understand where to start. Do I start with a tea? Do I start with a tisane or a tincture? A supplement? How should we approach this?
Well, one of the things that really attracts me to the herbal world is that these are ideal self-care tools. Everybody can use them. And in the cultures that you refer to, everyone does use them. So an average Asian meal is full of medicines. We call them spices. And frankly, you can have them up to your ears and you won't be doing yourself any harm. We probably have a significant spice deficit in this country. And I always keep banging on about having more turmeric, because we know that these are very valuable medicinal agents. They increase blood flow, they increase digestive performance, almost certainly very important for the microbiome. And we're finding out all this stuff now. And everyone was doing it without thinking about it, a bit like Emily, in the old days. So the first thing I would say to anybody who's asking is start with your food. And I work with Pukka now, and we do teas, with lovely tasting teas. But they're also there. They were designed as originally Ayurvedic formulas, Indian formulas, to have that blend and to support a normal daily routine with herbs and things. So teas are a good place to start. They're gentle, the dosing is not high, and you'll begin to understand that you can then do the Emily bit and say, oh, how does this feel to me? And if you don't like that one, you try another one. And most often, I don't know what's going to suit you. So I say, well, here's a few options. Try the peppermint or the chamomile or the fennel or whatever it is. See which one suits you. Ask yourself the question next morning, what was that like?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
so
go from there. Start with the small.
Yep.
Build your confidence. Another place I work with, which I strongly commend to anybody who wants to know about herbs, set up by the founder of Pukka, Sebastian Pole. It's called herbalreality.com. If you want to know about what herb to use and when and how strong to use it. It's very accessible. It's not meant for professionals particularly. It's meant for anybody. You can just go up there and you can see the dosage regimes. You can see where to get it. You can see what makes sense, and it'll encourage you to taste it. Because, like Emily, your tongue and your palate are a very good guide to what will suit you.
And do you feel that herbal remedies can sit alongside pharmaceuticals? Or
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And most of my patients are on pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
And so we have to do the dance, and we're not in the business of getting people off their prescriptions, but we can often get them to the point where they go back to their GP or whatever and say, you know what, I think I don't need this anymore. Or, most often the doctor's delighted, as long as the blood markers are stacking up and all the rest of it. So we often provide a sort of support system for people who are on medication. And most often we're dealing with things that the medication wasn't intended to deal with.
Okay.
The other things that contribute almost certainly. I was doing a presentation yesterday on inflammation and herbs, and pointing out that most of the things that we access and from the herbal are missed by conventional anti-inflammatories. They're working on, exposure at the gut level, exposure at the mouth level, various other factors that fire up inflammation, which can be treated quite accessibly. With things like plants.
Let's talk about inflammation and herbal remedies, because inflammation, as we've talked about many times on this podcast, seems to be the root cause of a number of different issues. I think everyone is aware of that these days. And if there are things that can enhance our inflammation balance, it stands to reason that it would be overall beneficial for a person. So what sort of herbs do you utilize in that respect, and how do you further personalize it to the individual?
We can start very simply with what we eat on the plate. So we're very interested in what we're calling phytonutrients, which are the added value that many plants bring to the plate. We know about vitamins and minerals and so on. But there are many other things that plants produce which have value, like polyphenols, we call them, or the volatile oils, the things that give the aroma. And I'm working with Pucko on this one again. We're articulating a campaign to bring phytonutrients on the plate alongside fruit and vegetables as a value. One of the things about phytonutrients is they're colourful. So one of the quick is eat a rainbow every day, because the reds and the blues and the yellows and the greens all denote different important pharmacological agents. So just eating a diversity of colours is a start. Spices are stacked full of these phytonutrients. So eat Asian, for heaven's sake. We've heard about the Mediterranean diet. Let's start eating Asian diet. And I'm personally convinced that, in a world full of deprivation where it's difficult for many people to afford healthy food, to have cooked lentils with turmeric, a dal, maybe some spinach and potatoes, can save your life because of the spices. You don't need to spend, how much does that cost? A few pennies.
Yeah.
We don't need to spend a lot of money to eat healthily if you eat in an indigenous fashion, the same foods that people have always eaten, particularly in Asia. And so, yes, I see that we can build on our plant knowledge very easily, simply at home, starting with the food that we eat.
Yeah. Is there a collection of spices? You mentioned turmeric a couple of times. Is there a collection of spices that are like must-haves, do you think, in most people's cupboards that you could refer to?
Yeah. Turmeric is a must-have. No, just end off that conversation. You can shoot me later, but no, turmeric has to be on your plate. It's almost ideally suited for the modern ills. It deals with so many issues, the blood sugar issues, the obesity issues, the metabolic syndrome issues, the inflammatory issues, for heaven's sake, the gut microbiome issues are all on its plate. So turmeric definitely, cinnamon as very much for the whole insulin resistance, the blood sugar metabolic syndrome issue. Lots of evidence stacking up that it talks directly at that insulin resistance interface. Ginger.
Is there a certain type of cinnamon that you recommend?
People vary as to which. My interest is my favorite is what we call Sri Lankan or Ceylon cinnamon, as well, or Cinnamonum verum, if you give it its Latin name, Zeylanicum. But the cassia from China, and there's Indonesian cinnamons as well, and you'll find them all on the shelves. But if you buy the quills, it's the one with the multiple quills that seem, and you can smell them.
Yeah,
Emily, do an Emily. Yeah, you can immediately tell what is good. Ginger, I mean, just step back a bit. It has been the most valuable commodity in human history, weight for weight. And you know what? It was made extinct in the wild 2,000 years ago. All the ginger we've had since has had to be grown by rootstock because it's lost the capacity to live in the wild. And that's human. We were doing ecocide 2 millennia ago.
Really?
So valuable was ginger in people's mind because it's the antidote to cold and damp. And cold and damp were the main metaphors for infection. It's particularly lung and joint infection. So ginger was the go-to remedy for most sort of infections, frankly. And we think we have a lot of it about, so let's use it. And a simple take-home remedy that I would offer anybody living in this benighted climate in the UK and during the winter, when you get in the colds and the sniffles and you're feeling the cold, and suddenly, you get the cold in your kidneys, and something's coming along. Get some freshly ground ginger, powder some cinnamon, make a hot tea, sip it, and in fact get a thermos flask, put that in there and keep sipping it through the day, and you'll get instant healing. You'll feel your passages clearing, and we know why that's happening. Simple home remedy. You're not going to kill yourself. You're not going to damage yourself, but and you'll realize how fast these things can work. It's literally in minutes. So these are, it's making what we're talking about here cheap and accessible and available to anybody. Really is my passion.
Yeah. And the full spectrum of spices out there: cumin, fennel seeds,
coriander, cardamom.
Cardamon's huge.
One of the best spices for recovery in convalescent care, and when you're weak and enfeebled and can't eat very well, and you need to build yourself up. Cardamom. Chinese were using it up to here. Very fond of it in India. Yeah.
So when as a strategy of trying to increase your polyphenol content, your phytochemical content, is it a machine gun approach? Is it trying to get all those different ones on top of having a few sort of regular favorites like turmeric, ginger, garlic?
So you start with the shotgun approach, just have everything, pile it on, get a good cookbook in which they don't do this, but they don't sprinkle it on, they heat the spices on, good proper aromatic tastes, and then do the Emily thing. Try out a tea or a spice on its own, and how does that feel? Yeah. And we sometimes divide people in the old times. They used to divide them into hot and cold.
Yeah.
So
my mum always tells me about this. Yeah. She's always like, "You're too hot. You shouldn't have too much ginger."
She's right as usual. We don't argue with mum. But there is another side to it, because sometimes you heat up because you're in a fever. And that's a defense measure against what people used to say was the cold. And so sometimes you need to support that. And so one of the standard ways of helping someone in a fever would be to warm them up with some ginger and cinnamon again. We went to India so many years ago, my wife, and she'd just come out of a really deep bronchial infection. And I promised her India would be wonderful, lovely weather. We hit a downpour, and there was just damp coming down the walls, and her bronchitis went really bad, and she was in this hotel in Delhi. We went downstairs. She was barely walking. There was a guy in a suit and, a bit tucker behind this chrome and steel bar, obviously waiting for the party to start. And, he was 17 or 18, took one look at her and he said, "I know what you need." And he went and got the cocktail bar out, and he ground fresh ginger, fresh black pepper, and cinnamon, and made a cocktail of it and gave it to her on me.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is saying a lot. This is a 17-year-old street kid who knew what she needed.
Yeah.
And it's, it made all the difference.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, the whole warming up stuff when you have an illness, because we're actually changing our opinion on the use of antipyretics in common colds and fevers and viral illnesses. So the traditional sort of approach is you give antipyretics, you give paracetamol, you bring that fever down straight away. And whilst you need to be careful, particularly in kids who are at risk of febrile convulsions, in a lot of cases, you might actually be prolonging the severity of your disease, because the increase in temperature is actually a protective measure. So there's a few things that we're doing in medicine that I think we're coming around to a different way of thinking. And it's very in line with like things that my mum says, actually, which is always quite amusing whenever we talk about it.
Well, I talk a lot about fever management, which is just that, is incubating. Because at 99 or 100, you've got 3 times the whack of your white blood cells. They're charging around crazy things, and poor germ at that point. Yeah. And so you don't want to abort that. You don't want to stop that. You want to incubate it. Yeah. So it's all about keeping the temperature. We've got a thermometer. We can do this. So we cool it. We let some of the sweat out, and we cool it in simple ways, and you can do it quite easily. And then you let it break, the fever to break. And I've often said, one good fever, you're fixed, because you've killed your first lion. Your white blood cells are now the innate immunity is firing them now on all cylinders. Any germ that pokes its head in the door is going to get whacked.
Yeah.
So fever management, and there's sometimes about warming you up at that point, because you want to keep the temperature right. You don't want it to sink too prematurely. And people used to do this without too much advice. People instinctively understood this point.
So we've talked about food. We talked about the inclusion of spices there as the first line of inflammation balance and defending against excessive inflammation. We're about to move on to the specific herbal remedies.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where we want to cut it. So one of the main areas inflammation starts is actually in the lining of the blood vessels, so what we call the endothelium. And endothelial dysfunction has been implicated in most as the startup of most inflammations. So a lot of the herbs and spices actually work there. So all the spices I've mentioned, we have evidence to show that they work on that front line, blood vessel wall. But there are many other herbs that we use in practice. I mean, people have heard of ginkgo, for example. That works specifically at blood vessel walls. And we can go down the list of many of the remedies we use. Hawthorn, which we use very much for circulation and heart support, directly on the blood vessel walls, and long list. But you will get that from the colors. Yeah. So they will also work at that endothelial level. The spices definitely work. So that's one front line. The major front line, of course, is the gut wall, because we know that most of our inflammation, that the main challenge we have is in here, in the gut. And so we need, first of all, to look after our diet, and then we look at prebiotics and probiotics and various other ways of protecting what we increasingly now see as important guy down here called the microbiome. Make sure that's in good shape. And sometimes after antibiotics, you need to support it in different ways. But there are, again, many herbs that we know have evidence for. And you know what they are? Turmeric, ginger, cinnamon. I keep coming back around. It's like a stuck record. Yeah.
Are there any others that perhaps...
almost too many to list. But we use a lot of mucilages, for example. Okay. So if you heard of gum arabic, that's a classic remedy for healing the gut. Slippery elm is another one that people have used from North America. The tannins. Tannins are the things you make leather with, so they basically curdle or coagulate protein, and you make leather out of it from soft tissues. If you swallow tannins, which could be a strong black tea, but there are many other herbs that deliver them more accurately than that, you will temporarily leatherize, if you like, the lining of your upper stomach. and that will reduce inflammatory activity. So anything that comes from up here and the gullet and the stomach can be reached directly with appropriate tannin-containing herbs. So meadowsweet, for example, a good example of one of those that we use a lot for healing at the stomach level. But here's the thing, meadowsweet is where aspirin came from. The old name for meadowsweet was spirea, and there was a German chemist who was wandering down the riverbank one day trying to find an alternative to the stuff from willow bark, salicylic acid, which works very well to reduce inflammation but drills holes in your stomach. And he was looking for a gentler way of doing it, and he saw the meadowsweet on the riverbank, and he smelt it and realized it was wintergreen smell, it's salicylate. And a little idea came because he knew that meadowsweet was used for healing the stomach.
Right.
So he went and synthesized what we now call spirea, aspirin, specifically because he thought that would be gentle on the stomach. He was wrong. But the meadowsweet from which he got it actually has tannins and mucilages in it, which probably protect the gut and allows you to have a modicum of aspirin without the damage to the stomach. So this is the sort of magic we play with.
Any others? I've heard of lemon balm, peppermint. What other sort of?
Well, those are both great because you can make them as teas. And peppermint's a good example of what I was saying earlier about hot and cold, because most of the spices are warming. And I don't know usually to start with. I can sometimes tell a bit from looking at the tongue and so on, but I don't know which is going to suit any particular person. So I'll simply say, here's some fennel, or here's some ginger, and here's some peppermint. You tell me which you feel better with, because peppermint is cooling. Fennel is warming. Ginger is warming. Chamomile is sort of cooling. So you can choose. Do an Emily. Just pick the one that you feel good with the next day, and then go from there. And then you can stack it up. If you find that peppermint is helpful, there are other cooling things you can use. We call them bitters, which are one of the people associate with herbs. They taste awful. But there's some that are really effective as bitters. Dandelion is a very simple one, but we can go right through to wormwood, which the French for wormwood is vermouth. So, it's one of those cultural things. Coffee, black coffee without the sugar, that's a bitter. And those are cooling and have always been understood all the way around the world. They cool down heat. And so innately are anti-inflammatory. And they do that mostly by working at the gut level.
Yeah, you mentioned we were talking earlier about using teas and that sort of like first level of like how to test what works for you. What are the next sort of stage? What are the next steps in terms of how do you slowly increase the dose? And is it that sort of activity that you would recommend doing alongside a medical herbalist?
Yeah, so I'm all for giving people tools for doing it themselves.
Yeah.
I see medical herbalists as the guys you turn to when you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And you want
this
a bit
is
more.
a very extensive field. I wouldn't be able to figure out myself even.
So you start at the beginning. You start with the teas. Answer the question: was it the mint or was it the ginger that you liked? Because that'll set you down a particular path. If the mint, you can start with a few bitters. If it's the warming that you need, there's all the spices to go for. Then if you think I'd like some more turmeric, but I don't want curry for breakfast, which is, what you have in India, you have curry every meal of the day. But you don't want to do that. Then you take a turmeric supplement. And you can go and check those out. And places like Herbal Reality, you can find out what the dosage you can aim for and where to go, what you need to get. And then as you get more and more intrigued, and particularly as you're getting the feedback here, you can say, I'll go and consult someone who knows about this stuff, and go and consult a herbal practitioner. So the stitches along the way.
Yeah. In building my app, where we've created a selection of recipes that we're constantly building the library of, and you can field your according to health goals. We've also got a nutritional section, which looks at the traditional nutritionals of, your macros, your micronutrients. What's really lacking, like we were talking about earlier, is this understanding of phytochemicals and the indices that represent how phytonutrient rich this particular recipe is, owing to the herbs, the spices, the specific vegetables you're using. You're working on something, am
Just
I right?
like
in
that.
terms of tell
we
me
want to build
that.
a campaign where we're sort of this is Pucker now, recruiting stakeholders and other people around the idea that we got our plate, the healthy plate with its fruit and vegetables and its fish and so on. We think that there's something we can add to that, which we're calling herbs and spices. Simple. Most people think of herbs and spices as flavorings. We want to change the view that they're more than flavorings. They're actually health promoting, and because they provide these chemicals, these phytonutrients, and we can put chapter and verse to it. We can actually show health outcomes that link to these things. We want to build that case and to get a campaign because it's cheap. We have health inequalities. We talk about the 5 a day, but about 15% of the population do 5 a day. The other 85% nowhere near it. How do we get them a little healthier without them having to raid their piggy bank? And one answer is to get more spices into their diet, more herbs. So yes, hits right what we want to see in the public interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there wasn't an appreciation for that nutrient density, because most nutritional profiles just don't represent, how healthy it is to have 3 different teaspoons of different spices that you're using.
And we can so easily put that right with a bit of work.
Yeah.
And turn it into very accessible. I want a little badge saying, herbs and spices are good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. You've got a lot of papers and reviews on the website. You're part of the Herbal Relief, I think.
Herbal Reality.
Herbal Reality. Herbalreality.com. Do you use Phenol Explorer and a lot of those sites to look at the phytochemical profiles?
We are building those. We are putting those things together.
Brilliant,
so we want to create a reference point to show what if it's a teaspoon, how much are you adding to? What value does that do? What value does having a herbal tea have in terms of its adding to your daily intake? So we want to quantify that. So we are right as we speak on that journey.
Yeah, that would be amazing, because I think a lot more people are becoming more appreciative of plant points in general, the diversity of the ingredients that you have on a weekly basis. 30 is the ideal number, and spices account for a quarter of it. So we're sort of moving in the right direction, but I think there's a lot more we can do by making it a lot more obvious about how nutrient dense a meal is just through the addition of a few different spices. Yeah, and on that note, in an ideal scenario, what sort of quality of spices are we looking for? What represents a high quality spice, whereas something, compared to another spice that might not, have the same amount of phytochemicals in?
There are various ways in which you can reduce the quality of the spices. Let's start that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Once you powder something, it's beginning to oxidize. It's beginning to lose its aromatics. So I always suggest, first of all, if you're buying for yourself, go for things like cumin and coriander and so on. Go for the actual whole seeds and get a mill or grinder or spice mill or something to grind them fresh, and you'll notice the difference. I mean, the aromas are wonderful, aren't they? If you are buying powders, and this is a trick we all know in the supermarket, when you see the little bottles, go for the back for the longest sell-by date, because you don't buy something that's been sitting on a shelf for 6 months. That's what I'm saying, because you're going to lose a lot of quality. Yeah. As Pucker, we obviously make a great strong point about growing organically, because we want, A, to grow sustainably, but B, we know that plants grown organically are higher in phytochemicals and phytonutrients. And there's an absolutely obvious reason for that, because most of them are produced by plants for their own defense. They're adapting to the climate change and climate stresses and insects and so on. If a plant's being sprayed with pesticides and so on, it doesn't need to produce those phytochemicals. So we know that organically grown has a much higher stack of those phytonutrients. Yeah. So we make a point of that, but of course it's more expensive. But go for a reliable supplier. Don't go down to some bin end at the end of the road. Just find someone who's got a reputation to protect, who will more likely to provide you with the quality that you need.
Yeah, brilliant. Personal question. I'm about to go on my stag soon. And as you can imagine, I've racked up quite a bit of bad karma along the last couple of decades with my friends. I'm going to be drinking alcohol, hopefully not too much, but I'm probably going to need some support. So considering I'm generally pretty healthy, I generally sleep well, are there particular medical herbs you think I should include in my self-care kit whilst I'm away?
You should, especially if you're going to a hot and steamy climate, because this is where the bitters come into their own.
Okay.
They are primarily liver remedies. I mean, that's how you can distill a lot of stuff, that they work on basically getting the liver working better for you. So they make themselves ideal hangover cures. So start with dandelion. There's another remedy that the French are very fond of called artichoke leaf, which you can get. But any bitter can be used. And the more hot and steamy it gets, the more they're effective because they're cooling and drying. So they're so if the result of having too much alcohol is you feel hot and steamy and you want to loosen your collar, that's when you need the bitters.
Okay.
Wormwood is another one, and you can buy them, especially in airport duty frees, they can buy these little bottles of bitters that you're meant to take after you've been out for a party.
Okay. So artichoke leaf, wormwood,
dandelion, gentian root. If you buy these bitters, they call them bitters. You'll see a long list of basically spices, but a lot of these bitter herbs as well.
Okay.
That would be my stack for a stag.
Okay.
Would be a bottle or two of those bitters. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm gonna stock up on those before I go. This has been brilliant. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And your website is fantastic. We're gonna do a deep dive into some of the other topics that we haven't had enough time to talk into, like the chronic illness and the ways in which you can support that with medical herbs. So that's brilliant.
Look forward to that, because that's what we do most of our working day is working with people with chronic illnesses.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind that campaign as well to get spices on the plate.
We'll call on you, Rupi, because we'll be looking for everybody who can broadcast this as widely as we can. It's such an easy target. It's such an easy message.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eat the spices,
Thank you so much.
Rupi.